As Walt and Disneyland were celebrating their second anniversary, Walt Disney proudly surveyed his park and was able to reflect on his and his carefully assembled team's great achievement. Disneyland was more than just a theme park, it was a magical realm like no other place in the world. It's amazing how much the land had changed, how much the vision had expanded, how much Disneyland had already sealed itself into the American zeitgeist in just a span of a few years. By the end of 1957, over 10 million people would have walked through the gates and into Disney's Magic Kingdom. Yet in spite of all of that, Disneyland, if you can believe it, was still struggling financially. As of 1957, Disneyland had yet to achieve a noticeable commercial profit. There were considerable investments being made in the creation, expansion, and maintenance of the park that a public perspective would suggest everything was going wonderfully, and yet Disneyland was still struggling to find fiscal success. It was a tricky time for the Disney company. They needed to adapt, but where and how, and to who? As we recall Walt's vision of his future park, it was a family-centric place where parents could be entertained just as much as their children. This idea was the life song of Disneyland, and that vision was achieved quickly. Well, kind of. There was a harder shell to crack. Disneyland was successful only so much, and there was a specific demographic that it was striving to reach. Teenagers. The unattainable market. Could these teens, and particularly these teenagers in love, be the key to saving everything?
Well, if I had it to do over again, I think, no, I don't think it would. I don't know. I hope I don't have to do it over again.
The year is 1957, and Americans watch reluctantly as the Russians pull the trigger on a pistol that officially launches the space race. While down on Earth, audiences are whistling into theaters to potentially make their way across the bridge on the River Kwai. And viewers back home are watching Lucy and Ricky Ricardo take their final bow on the series finale of the sitcom pioneer, I Love Lucy. And Disneyland is ever expanding. Guests for the first time ever could now take a tour inside the iconic centerpiece of Disneyland, Sleeping Beauty Castle. While the film itself was right in the middle of its long production, Walt knew that it would be an eventual success and was able to utilize the most recognizable focal point of his entire park as a tool of years-long marketing for the upcoming film, Disney's 16th animated feature film titled Sleeping Beauty. Patrons of the park had been impressed by the unique structure for the last 2 years, even with no full concept of the story it was based around, save for the occasional glimpses that would be showcased on the Disneyland program by Walt himself. In spite of this, Sleeping Beauty Castle was still a staple of your visit and something you just had to get your picture with. But now in 1957, guests could finally enter in and experience the whole story, spoilers be darned. Here, visitors could get acquainted with the characters of the film like Princess Aurora and her colorful fairy caretakers. Through unique effects and set pieces, they could observe these scenes and this story as they came alive within the castle. Kids and families were dazzled by the three fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, and were petrified by the jade-skinned Mistress of Evil, Maleficent. In fact, the final effect featuring the cackling villain lurking close by in the next hallway right before the exit was almost too scary for younger tourists. They'd be too frightened to leave. This required some tweaks and modifications in the following months. The movie itself at this time was still over 2 years away. Meanwhile, in Tomorrowland, the Monsanto House of the Future puts out its welcome mat. Here, Disneyland guests could enter inside and see what common living in the future would be like, as burgeoning technology and visionary predictions would be prominently showcased inside. The house itself looked like it came straight out of a science fiction comic book, making it just another one of the park's architectural icons, and inside were more dazzling wonders. In the first iteration of the attraction, you'd find new and futuristic things like picture phones and dishwashers by ultrasonic waves, thermostats with choosable scents, and even lights that you could dim. Almost above everything else, you'd learn about the marvel of modern plastics. The House of the Future was one of the attractions that did not require a ticket to get inside, which always kept the home bustling and moving. It would see many updates in the future as the technology presented itself. On a family trip this year, Walt bought himself a 10,000-pound petrified tree while driving through a tourist attraction of a petrified forest in Colorado. In an attempt to justify the unique purchase, he jokingly dedicated it to his wife, Lillian, as a commemoration of their 31st wedding anniversary. Lillian promptly designated it for Disneyland. Now that's a gift that rocks. Naturally, Walt had always intended it to be displayed at Disneyland.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It's date night at Disneyland with the Elliott Brothers and the Disneyland Date Nighters. Let's dance!
And speaking of love, 1957 also saw the debut of Date Night at Disneyland. It was an effort to make the park appealing to a market Disney had been struggling with since its debut: teenagers. Teenagers were harder to find in the park. At this time, a majority of Disneyland's attendance was coming from the local population. Parents and their younger kids were commonplace, sure, but the local teenagers could maybe, unjustifiably of course, write off the entire venture as just lame kiddie rides. They were harder to find in the park because for teens in the 50s, it just wasn't a gas. But Disneyland had a special trick up their sleeve. Date Night at Disneyland would be a brand new concept in nighttime entertainment and would require a brand new entry ticket just to attend. Introducing the first hard-ticketed event that Disneyland would try out, Date Night was geared towards teenagers and young adults. It would be a fun and sophisticated and almost certainly romantic evening of Disney, dancing, and musical entertainment. Every Friday and Saturday would see extension of the park hours late into the night. And if you couldn't quite keep this in memory, you could always refer back to the song from the Elliott Brothers and the Disneyland Date Nighters, Disneyland's longtime date night house band.
We're open till the clock strikes 1 a.m. Friday and Saturday night.
And really, that in itself was part of the appeal. Date night wasn't just the fact of being in the park after hours, dressed up and looking dapper with your boyfriend or girlfriend, or even just hanging out with your peers. It was also about the entertainment factor. Sure, you had access to many of Disneyland's popular attractions, but the key element was the inclusion of stages and dance floors around the park, which would showcase different bands and artists of the era. The main pavilion and bandstand was in the location known as Carnation Plaza Gardens. It featured a huge space where guests could easily cut a rug with their best guy or gal. Even Walt Disney himself couldn't resist the music. In addition to that, there were also supplementary stages in Adventureland and a unique dance floor in the Golden Horseshoe. There was even a setting on the Mark Twain riverboat, which created a lovely venue for your romantic evening as it gently floated around the rivers of America by moonlight. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and Annette Funicello would make regular appearances at these events. These guys would croon and the teens would swoon as these hugely popular musical guests were taking the stage. Date Night at Disneyland turned out to be a massive success, and it was a major factor in not only getting Disneyland out of the red and finally making actual profit, but it was also another turning point in the true power of Disneyland at night. Adding fireworks, extending the park hours, and adding more entertainment ended up being wildly beneficial for Disneyland. And Disney could now market a similar but almost wholly unique experience of being in the park after the sun had set. Date Night would continue and secure the promise of future nighttime expansion in almost every aspect. So, at the end of 1957 and all the way onward, it didn't matter who you were, Disneyland was surely the place to be. And there you have it, folks. 1957 was a blast. It was a smash. And speaking of smash, make sure you smash that subscribe button, you smash that like button, you smash your friends, or just tell your friends. Share the channel and hit that bell because we got a lot more history, a lot more adventures coming your way. So I guess that's all I got. Until next time, we'll see you in the happy place. Bye.